Hello and welcome back to another video, this time taking a bit more of a look at Project Cars 3, letting you know what I think of it, whether I think it's worth buying or not. So we did play about 3 hours of this on stream the other day, and I've played a little bit since, which I'm going to show some bits of in this video. But yeah, going over what I think of this game. So I should start off by saying, if you've played Project Cars 2, and you're looking for a sequel to that, don't buy it. It's not a sequel to Project Cars 2, despite its name. That's probably the biggest flaw with the game, is they called it Project Cars 3. They should have come up with a new series name if they wanted to launch something completely different like this, because it's not the sim we know and love, the previous Project Cars game, which I'm sure a lot of you have enjoyed. If you're watching this and you want to know whether to get this one, I'm sure it means you've probably enjoyed the previous games. So if you're looking for a sequel for those, a replacement to Project Cars 2, don't buy it, it's not for you. Get the new Assetto Corsa or something, probably. So yeah, I knew this before playing. I knew it wasn't going to be a sim, so I went into this with an open mind, looking at it as a new arcade racer, rather than anything else. I'm trying to ignore the Project Cars name, although I will mention a few bits relating to the previous game later on. But yeah, I wanted to go into it looking at it as another arcade racer, a Forza Motorsport 7 sort of equivalent, or Grid equivalent, that sort of thing, or a sort of sequel to the old Need for Speed Shift games. So I knew it wasn't going to be a sim. We kind of all knew that before launch, so I think they actually made a bit of a mistake with their marketing. So a lot of the people that they gave early access to were sim racers who had enjoyed the previous two games, rather than more arcade-based people. So I think they made a bit of a mistake there. They gave it to people who clearly wouldn't enjoy it, because that's not what it is. It's not the kind of game that they play. So you might have seen a few reviews and things where people are just completely disappointed with the game. They say it's terrible rubbish, but that's basically people who have played the previous two, because it's completely different. They got a bit of a surprise going into it, and they don't really know why they've done it to that game. So yeah, this is kind of looking at it as a game rather than as a Project Cars 2 sequel, a game in its own right. So yeah, obviously it has arcade-style physics and handling. As I've said, it's completely different to that, but they do feel nice to drive. The cars feel quite responsive. You can kind of feel where you're putting them. It feels better than it did on Grid, if any of you've played the new Grid. They're very floaty on that and kind of hard to predict where they're going. This is a bit easier. It's a bit easier to kind of know where they're going, but there's slightly more feeling to them. You can sort of feel the back of the car going, you can save it. It's not kind of floaty like it is on Grid. So it's actually quite nice to drive. You can kind of feel the car going and catch it before it slides out too far or spins. Yeah, I quite like them. I found it quite enjoyable to drive with. So yeah, they're kind of better than they are on the Crew 2 or Grid. They're not kind of floaty and weird like they are on those games. But it's not quite your Forza Motorsport or your Gran Turismo kind of level of feeling. I know they're kind of slightly more targeted at realistic. They're slightly more towards sim. They're not sims, but they're slightly more simulation than this. This is very much arcade. I would say it kind of sits below Motorsport. It's slightly more arcadey than Motorsport, but slightly more realistic than Grid, which I really didn't like the handling on. So the handling's not actually too bad. It's not your simulation sort of stuff, but the cars are nice to drive. A bit of a challenge to not spin them. I've been playing it with no assists in all of this. So yeah, it's actually not that bad to drive. It's not a sim, but it is nice to drive. Been doing this all on controller, obviously. It's not really aimed at being used on the steering wheel anymore. So yeah. So there's a few things, I know I said I didn't want to compare it to Project Cars 2, but there's a few things missing that were in the previous game that I feel like, even if they're taking it in this more arcade direction, I don't really know why they've taken some of these elements out, and there's a few bits that are worse than the previous games, and I don't really know why. I'm not talking about the handling. The handling's different. It's not worse. It's arcade, not sim. It's still good. It's just different. So that I understand. But some of the things, like, they've taken things out. They've taken dynamic weather out. Yes, you can still go into the menu and choose your weather for the race. There's all the different settings. But if you remember, the previous game had dynamic weather, so you could kind of set it to random and it would change, and it doesn't do any of that anymore. There's no pit stops. All the pit stops you'll notice when you go past the pit lane are all barricaded off. You can't set pit stops. You can't do that at all. You can't do multi-class. If you remember in Project Cars 2, you could kind of set up any classes you want up against each other in a sort of... I think you could put up to 4 different classes in. You can't do any of that. So yeah, there's a few things missing like that. There's no damage. There's visual damage. If you completely clonk it into a wall, if you hit a wall quite hard, you get some visual damage, but there's no actual damage. I mean, you might not necessarily want the damage, but you could switch it on and off in the previous game, so I don't know why it's not there at all. So they've taken some things like that out. And then the biggest flaw with the game, I think, is the graphics and the car models and stuff, which I don't really understand, because about 80-90% of the cars are taken from the previous game. Same with the circuits, so I don't really know why it's got worse. The car models are all kind of blurry. The graphics are awful. They're like a mobile game. The pixels are very visible, which I haven't really noticed on the game for at least... It looks like it's a game from like 5 or 10 years ago, or a mobile game or something. The pixels are really very visible, particularly around the edges of the car models. It's quite kind of blurry. You can see the sort of triangle-y shapes and stuff. It's really not very good. So yeah, I went into this expecting it to just handle really badly, but I was actually pleasantly surprised by the physics and handling. And then I was very, very disappointed with the graphics. I'm not really sure why they're quite so bad. It's actually not very nice at all to look at. Now you might think it looks fine if you're watching on an iPad or something, but I'm playing this on a sort of TV-sized screen. It's kind of 28-32 sort of size, and all my other games look fine. This just looks really bad, so if you connect it, it's just not going to look good, basically. And I don't really understand, like I said, like 80-90% of the cars came from the previous game. They've got all the stuff in the previous game. They could have just visually kept it the same, even if they're going for a more arcadey feeling. So I don't really understand why they've done that. So that's my only real complaint over the previous game. Yes, it's different. It's arcade, not sim. We knew that. But the graphics have got worse, which I don't really understand. And all those elements they removed, yes, some of them they took out because they're more simulation-style things. I guess they thought they didn't need them in an arcade game, but yeah. I think it's a shame stuff's been removed, and some of it is a bit of a step backwards from the previous game. So yeah, visually it's not as good as the previous 2 Project Cars. It's not even as good as Need for Speed Shift, which is kind of... it's almost like spiritual successor to those, because that was the same studio, and it was a more arcade-based game. So it's kind of like successors to those, almost. But yeah, it's even worse than those, and those are like 10, 12 years old now, so... yeah, it looks worse than a lot of older games, which I don't really understand why they managed to do that. So anyway, those are my biggest complaints, and obviously the name. It shouldn't be a Project Cars game, really. They should have come up with something new. I guess maybe they thought they'd sell more if they used an existing name, but anyway. The cars and tracks, I'm actually very pleased with the list of cars and tracks on here. We've got all the stuff come forward from Project Cars 2, obviously all the cars. But then we've got things like the Jesko and the Lotus Evija. And there's like a Supra Group 3 car. What else have we got? There's a DB11 Group 4 car. There's some cool stuff in here. There's the C8 Corvette. But yeah, I'm particularly liked driving the Jesko and the Evija. Very cool. Very cool to have those in here, and then we had some of the weird and interesting cars from before. There's a Formula E car in here, which I don't know if it was in the last game or not, but that was quite fun. So yeah, there's quite a good varied car list. It's not up to the number of cars you get in a Forza sort of game, so it's not up to the number in Motorsport 7, but I think it's probably got more than Grid did. So again, it's kind of better than Grid, but not quite at the level of Forza. In terms of tracks, I think it's better than Forza. There's a very good selection. You've got all your stuff from Project Cars 2, basically, and that's a lot more tracks than you get in Forza. So in terms of tracks, it's definitely a better alternative to like Forza Motorsport or Grid, I would say. Much better selection, more of them. So yeah, you get less cars than Forza, but arguably some of them are more interesting cars. So arguably in terms of cars and tracks, it's actually better than Motorsport 7. Not really in terms of cars, but in terms of tracks, there's definitely more to it than there is in the latest Forza game. And obviously all the Forzas have been quite similar recently, so it's something a bit fresh, a bit different if you're looking to it for an alternative to a Forza game. Or Gran Turismo, I guess, but there's going to be a new one of those soon, so maybe wait if you're debating between those two. But yeah, it is a valid alternative to Forza, I think. So yeah, that's the cars and tracks. We also have some customization in this game. When we first loaded it up, you get your usual character customization. That's a kind of given in games these days. But some of the car customization is quite nice. It's similar to the system on Drive Club or Grid. You kind of choose your vinyls, then choose the color. You don't place them like a sort of editor on Forza. Forza's kind of the benchmark for that sort of thing, I guess. Livery editors, I always find it the most intuitive to use. So it's not like that, but you choose your design, you choose the colours, you choose which sponsors you're putting on and stuff. You change your rims, you can change the number plates, you can change the tyres. Slightly disappointed I couldn't find a UK number plate, but anyway, yeah, you can mess with your number plate, mess with your tyres, your rims, everything, paint colour. There's actually quite a lot to it. There's not visual stuff like wings and stuff like that, but there is some quite good customization, which I did spend probably a bit too long messing about with in the stream, but I love messing about with that sort of thing. But yeah, it felt very like Grid or Drive Club in that sense. It kind of, in terms of UI and menus and stuff, it kind of feels very much like those as well. They're sort of arcadey style track games. So visually it's kind of very like those, apart from the graphics are way worse. But anyway, I haven't really messed about with the tuning. There is also tuning as well as visual customization, but it looks quite basic. Even when you check like aero things onto your car, they don't show visually, which I think is a bit of a shame. Bit weird, but the upgrades are quite basic. You kind of go on tyres. Do you want better tyres or much better tyres? And your car can move up and down classes. So if it starts in Road E, you can move to Road D if you upgrade it enough. I've not quite messed about with it completely, but you could probably get a Road E car into Hypercar class if you upgraded it enough, which is a bit weird, especially when visually it still looks exactly the same. But anyway, so I haven't messed about too much with that, but like I said, the customization is very good. The tuning, it's there, but it's not brilliant. Obviously, that's a new element from Project Cars 2, the customization and tuning, so that's something they've added, so it's not just stuff they've taken away, they have added stuff. But yeah, the main single-player part of the game, is what we're going to move on to next, really isn't that great. Career mode isn't very interesting. It feels very similar to what it did on Grid, which wasn't necessarily that enjoyable. It was a bit repetitive. I did play a bit of it, enjoyed it for a while, but the races were very repetitive. Same tracks, not great handling. I mean, this is better handling, so that's not really an issue. But the only problem I found is how easy the AI are. It's ridiculous. And no, it's not the setting. I've put them right up to their hardest and most aggressive setting, and you still pull away. You win by miles, so they really need to change that. Yes, you might be thinking, oh, it's an arcade game, you don't want AI to be difficult like on a sim. But that's just not true. You want just as much of a challenge whether you're an arcade racer or a sim racer. You don't want it to be easier. You might prefer slightly different handling. Not quite as realistic handling, but you still want a challenge. You still want the AI to be challenging to beat. Well, if you want them to be. Yes, you should be able to put them on easy and beat easily if that's what you're into, but if you want a challenge, you should be able to put them on a higher difficulty and have a challenging race. Not necessarily win all the time, kind of start mid-pack, gain a few positions, have a good race, rather than just flying away and winning. So I don't really know why they've done that, because the AI weren't that bad in Project Cars 2. Arguably, they're better to race with. They're kind of more aware of where you are when you are alongside them, but you pull away so quickly and disappear into the distance that it's just not very enjoyable. So I don't know why they've lost that from the previous game either. That is a bit of a shame. So maybe they can adjust the difficulty in an update, hopefully soon, because that's not really great. I mean, maybe you're just not expected to do the single player, just do online stuff and free play. But free play obviously has the same AI, but you get to drive more interesting cars. There's a bit of variety there. Because otherwise it's going to be a very repetitive career mode, winning everything very easily, which I think is going to get a bit boring. So yes, there is obviously a free play mode, which is good because I was worried I was going to have to play through all of it to get into like the Avaya and the Jesko and the cars I wanted to test out. But no, there is a free play mode. You can go and choose your car and track a bit like you did in the previous game. Same class, same category, identical cars. Choose how many AI there are, whether it's a race or free play. So you can go in and do that, which is quite fun. And then you've got your big track list of things you can take, places you can take your cars. So there is quite a lot in there that you can mess about with there. And online is actually quite fun. I had a couple of good races. Surprisingly, people aren't just out to kill you, ram you off the track like they were in the previous game. I mean, maybe we've just not got many players on here yet, so you've kind of only got the people that are really keen racers so far, because I think by the time this came out, the game would have come out yesterday. Obviously, if you pre-ordered it, you could play it 3 days ago, which is how I managed to stream it. But yeah, online is quite fun, and free play can be fun to mess about with stuff, but the career mode really isn't great. But I mean, is it really on anything else? Career mode on Grid, very repetitive, quite easy to beat the AI. Career mode on Forza Motorsport, just boring, I didn't really play very much of it. Career mode on Gran Turismo Sport, not very good. So I guess that's just a theme these days, as career modes aren't very good on games. So if you're looking for that, it's not that great. It could be fun, I guess, but it's just easy and repetitive, so you might not enjoy that very much. But yeah, the free play is fun. Online, you can get some good races. At the moment, we'll have to wait and see what happens when more players come in. And there's your kind of time trial events. So you have your monthly time trials, a bit like in Project Cars 2. But you have a limit of 30 attempts, which I think is quite cool. So your goes really count, rather than just going as long as you can, and then people who have more time have an advantage. So that's quite cool. We did actually try one of those in the stream in a Mustang, and that really drove very nicely as a Group 3 car. It was Laguna Seca in Group 3, so quite an obvious starting choice. But yeah, those are quite fun. Some of the online stuff's quite fun. So yeah, there's some fun stuff in there. There's a few new elements. Yes, it's a shame they've taken some of the stuff out, some elements out, put some elements in, but I guess that's kind of your transition from simulation to arcade. So if you're looking for an arcade racer, it is a very valid alternative. The only issue is the graphics, the visuals, the car models are quite a few steps back from the previous game, which I don't really understand. A lot of the cars came forward. They've got all the stuff from the previous game. I don't really understand why that had to get worse for it to become arcade. That is what I don't understand, and that's my main complaint about the game. Because I have no problem with it turning into an arcade game. Yes, maybe they shouldn't have used the Project Cars 3 name if they were going to do that, because it will upset some of your sim races and things, which for some reason is the people they sent it to test out, which I think was a mistake. They should have sent it to more arcade-based people. Don't send an arcade game to sim racers that used to be a sim, because you're going to upset them and get angry reviews. So a lot of them just played it, got very angry, and then did a review like that, just complaining about everything. So I kind of wanted to be more fair about it, and not look at it as a sim like they did. So yeah, like I said, the graphics are the only real problem I had with it. I just couldn't get away from them. They're always just there, whatever mode you're in. So that kind of ruined the experience for me, if I'm honest. That's my main complaint with the game. Apart from that, I'm a little bit upset that they removed some elements, but they put some new stuff in, which, like I said, is all part of it transitioning to arcade, which, again, it's a good arcade racer. It's really not bad. Like I said, it shouldn't have the name. It's more like a Need for Speed Shift 3 or a Drive Club 2 or a better version of Grid, of the new Grid. So it is kind of what Grid should have been like. It's like that, but better. So it drives better, it's more enjoyable. It's slightly more variety of what you can do, because you've got free play and stuff as well. So if you look at it as a new arcade track racer, it is very good. It's better than Grid, almost at the level of Motorsport 7. It's kind of like a Motorsport 7, but with a better track list and a different car list. So if you're looking at it as a sort of fill-in arcade racer until the next Motorsport, if you play Motorsport 7 and you're waiting for the new Motorsport, this is maybe a good option. Or if you want to play an arcade racer on this generation, if you want it on Xbox One and PS4, you don't want to have to upgrade to the new console for the new Gran Turismo and the new Forza, then it's a valid alternative to the Forza games. You might enjoy it for a while. You might get a year or so's gameplay out of it. and it is enjoyable to drive. It's just, like I said, the graphics. So yeah, think of it as a Forza Motorsport with better track list and better cars. So if you want it as that sort of game, then you should probably go and get it. But if you want it as a replacement for Project Cars 2, sort of upgrade from that, go and buy the new Assetto Corsa, or waste a lot of money on iRacing or something. Go and do something like that if you're looking for a sim, because that's really not what this is anymore. So yeah, for me, I enjoyed it. It's a good game, but it was let down by very, very, very bad graphics. They're completely dreadful. They're like a mobile game. I've not seen a console game with pixels this visible for about a decade, so I don't really understand what happened there. So yeah, that's my main complaint, is the visuals, but if you can look past that and just enjoy it for the driving experience, then it is quite fun to play. As a sort of fun arcade racer that you can jump on, have a bit of fun, not take too seriously, but is a little bit easier to drive, a little bit more predictable than real arcadey type things like Grid and The Crew 2. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts really. It's a good game. It shouldn't be called Project Cars 3. It's an arcade game, not a sim racer. It's let down by its graphics. That's kind of a summary of what there is to this game. So yeah, if I had to give it a score, I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10. It's not quite... It's kind of quite average. Yes, the track list's good. It's fun to drive, but it's quite average. So yeah, I'd probably only give it a 6. I did wonder whether to stretch to 7, but yeah, I would give it a 6. It's slightly more than your average 5 sort of game, but yeah, 6 out of 10. I did quite enjoy it. But yeah, also the price. It's priced like a Forza game or a Gran Turismo game. It's kind of priced at your usual amount of about £40 for the base game and about £70 for the Ultimate Edition, whatever they want to call it. So it's kind of priced at normal game price, which maybe isn't quite worth it. There's not as much to it as some of the other games for that amount, but yeah, like I said, definitely a valid alternative to the Motorsport series if you're looking for an arcade racer. It's kind of almost at that level, but with a better track list, and definitely better than Grid if you're considering this, or Grid. So yeah, I did actually quite enjoy it. I was quite surprised. I enjoyed it more than I would, because I watched all the reviews going, oh, it's dreadful before, but it's actually not that bad. Yes, it's not a sim racer, it's an arcade game, so don't go into it thinking that. I know I've said that several times, but that's really the main point here. It's not a sim, it's arcade. It's not really a Project Cars 3 game. They shouldn't have used that name. But yeah, as an arcade game on its own, it is quite good. So yeah, that is kind of my thoughts on this game. So yeah, do let me know if you enjoyed this video. I've not really looked at games when they first come out like this and done a sort of review style video on them. So let me know if you enjoy it, and I'll try and do a similar sort of thing when we get hold of some of the other new games that are coming out, like WRC9 and Dirt, the new Dirt game. But yeah, that is going to be all for this video. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back with the next video very soon.